It can be said there are two schools of thoughts when it comes to the development of new games for classic microcomputers and consoles. The first is about replicating the experiences of old with modern polish. Whilst the second, it's about pushing the limits, whether by showcasing new technical tricks or pushing the bounds of what can be done within a system and its limitations. Or perhaps by introducing mechanics familiarised elsewhere, introducing them to a new audience. The latter is certainly something which can be said for what Knight and Grail attempts on the Commodore 64, and is absolutely worth a revisit to see whether or not it does pull it off. This is Beyond the Scanlines, a series focusing on interesting games on classic computing and gaming platforms. Developed by Wide Pixel Games, Knight and Grail originally hit the Commodore 64 back in 2009. In this one, you take the role of a being on a quest to save their partner from a horrid curse. To do this, you've made a bargain with a powerful archmage to become a knight and seek the titular Grail, which is purported to break said curse, before turning it over to the archmage as payment. Your quest takes you through a castle and its surrounding environments, and right from the outset, it takes on quite a melancholic tone. During your explorations, you'll find plenty of areas which are off limits. In some cases, opening these is simply about finding the right switch and blasting it. For others, you'll need additional abilities to reach them. Many of these are required as the result from defeating one or more of the game's bosses, very much in the vein of many a classic exploratory platformer, or Metroidvania if you will. The bosses aren't your only threat though, as the castle and its surrounding grounds offer many a threat to be negotiated or dispatched to make your way through, which leads into one of Knight and Grail's more interesting mechanics. While some games have their enemies susceptible to particular weapons and leave the discovery of their weakness to trial and error, things are a little different with Knight and Grail, as the enemies and their attacks are colour-coded. This isn't for show, as these colours reference the elements of weapons and armour which you'll find on your quest. These elements, earth, wind, water, fire, ice and lightning, each have a matching sword and armour set, which goes with the starting iron sword and iron armour you begin with, which is a weak weapon, but it's one that can do damage to all enemies you encounter. Thus, finding the right weapon, one which is an element complementary to their armour, will allow you to defeat them much faster. This doesn't apply to all enemies, as for some, they'll take plenty of hits, no matter the sword you've selected, especially as you move to later stages of your quest. The opposite applies to armour. Wearing the armour which matches a given enemy attack will allow you to sustain no damage from it. This is key to surviving the encounters with the bosses you'll face during your quest. These battles usually involve the boss switching between two attack patterns, one using an element you can find an armour for, and one which you won't. As such, if you don't have that right armour set available, you could be taken out pretty darn fast, a result of just how relentless their attacks are, and the relatively low number of hits you can take before dying. As with any exploratory platformer, exploring a castle does offer its rewards, usually in the guise of increasing your maximum health. Though you'll also find pickups which can add a single health point back. You'll need to be careful though. These recovery pickups are one use only, so if you're a little too trigger happy when exploring, it's easy to release one, then collect it when you don't really need it, and boom, it's gone forever. Dying isn't an entirely punishing scenario, however. Once you find a Ruin of Rebirth, you can save your progress to disk, and, should you die, the game will reload your last save point. Prior to finding one, however, you'll be placed back at the entrance to the castle, with any gold you've collected lost to the void. This may sound like a big penalty, but at least in the early game, it's not as harmful as you may think, as by the time gold becomes a concern, you'll certainly have located all the Ruins of Rebirth in the castle. There's also a secondary benefit to using the ruins, as they'll refill your health back to 100% once you've saved your game. Navigating the overall map is fluid, and transitions are implemented well. As it's quite an expansive area, it's split up across 8 regions of various sizes. And the only time you'll see the game loading from disk is when you switch areas. Each of these regions carries their own tone, from the soundtrack played to the palette and designs of the world, along with the unique threats and traps for each. Also giving you the feeling of a wider world, especially one in which the tinge of sadness carries over from the castle itself. Though the wider map isn't too much of a challenge to explore, for moments where you do get lost, there is a map available accessed by pressing space. It doesn't show you where elements are, it really only focuses on the structure of the map and showing you where you've been, and also highlights where potential new paths may lie, which of course is always important as you gain new power-ups, allowing you to see where you might need to head next. As an overall experience, Knight and Grail stands out for me for many, many reasons. Though it's not the first game on the Commodore 64 to tackle the Metroidvania formula, with titles like Palace's Sacred Armor of Antiria sharing elements of it, along with others like Doriath. What it does, however, is to take the modern ideas of what the genre offers, and transplants that to the C64 in the best of ways. From its expansive map and unique mechanics around the elements for your weapons and armor, it makes an experience which can get a player engrossed in the challenge of locating the Grail and breaking the curse. It also offers a fair challenge, as though it doesn't offer the brutality which many games of the C64 era presented, it's not a pushover either. Learning the pitfalls and traps isn't a significant challenge, and a diligent player can certainly make their way through without being too stumped. Even if sub-tricky jumping may be required in order to secure some pieces. The only part of the experience I felt was a little underwhelming was dealing with the bosses, as once you determine the right armor to wear against them in their fight, survival becomes relatively easy. Though the only time I was genuinely bothered by this was on one particular occasion, but to digress further, I'd be venturing into spoiler territory, so perhaps I should stay silent on that. The final part of the package is its presentation, along with the visuals and audio. The soundtrack is haunting and melancholic, and complements the tone of the visuals excellently. Your quest is not necessarily a noble one. It's not about vanquishing some evil for a purpose, but rather one of survival. And it certainly offers a different take than many other titles do, at least in terms of their stories. All up, Knight and Grail makes for a thrilling experience, even after all this time from its original launch. It shows that as a platform, the Commodore 64 is more than just classic throwbacks, introducing mechanics and tropes you'll find in games for other systems, along with a modern design sensibility. Along with its sequel, Pains and Aches from 2018, it stands as a serious high point in bringing something new to the C64's game library, and makes an experience absolutely worth checking out. As with many of Psytronik's releases, you can buy the disc image on its own for a more than reasonable price digitally, or if the physical side of things is what you prefer, then you can of course order the disc by itself, or with a complete physical edition. Regardless of which you prefer, details to do so will be in the description as always. Which means it's time to wrap this one up. If this examination of a modded C64 masterpiece was one you appreciated, consider hitting the thumbs up on that video and perhaps tell your friends. Word of mouth helps out ever so much in introducing new folk to smaller channels which are out there. If the idea of chilled examinations of interesting titles, old and new, for classic systems tickles your fancy, consider hitting the subscribe button if you haven't already, and sit back as the videos enter your subscription box. Special thanks, as always, go out to the channel supporters on Patreon who help make these videos possible. And if you like what you see and would like to contribute to helping the channel as well, do check out the links in the video description. Finally though, thank you for taking another voyage beyond the Scanlines.